Hi, I'm iKia, and for today's video, we're going to have an in-depth guide into specializations, as it's been quite a while since I've done one of these in-depth guides. I've made several new ones, or started several new ones. I'll finish them hopefully as well. This one is the first in a line that we're going to go into some of the things in the game that most of us take for granted. Most of us know most of the things that they do, in this case specializations, but for instance later on in the future, for instance skills and such, and going through them and talking about them and just discussing why sometimes you would pick some specializations over others, what perks they give, what benefits they have, and even go over some of the tropes that sometimes are prevalent about them, as for instance the specialization weapons sucking, which I don't agree with. Personally, I do use them a lot. And we'll go into the guide itself. Let's go have a look at the guide and where it resides, and then we'll go into it and start discussing it. And as with all my in-depth guides, they reside in a folder that will be linked down below, of course. It is the 9.0 there. No, it's 8.0 specializations. Several others are in the works, as you see there, but today we'll be looking at the in-depth guide into specializations. It is a written form, so you can go through it in that way if you prefer it. This is the accompanying video. I feel the video adds a lot by just visually showing what all of the parts are. That's usually how I do it as well, as there is already for all of the other guides an accompanying video as well. And in this one, we'll go through specializations, we'll go over how to level them, what the benefits are of choosing certain specializations, and we'll go over all of the specializations, and in highlights are what I find the more important parts. We'll discuss as well the group specialization ammo counter, which is a poorly understood part of the game, I feel. It isn't very important, it just kind of happens, but knowing it and anticipating when you get specialization ammo, it can be kind of handy. And at the end, we'll round it out with some general tips. All parts of this, of course, will be timestamped down below, so you can jump around to a specific specialization or into any of the other parts. And as a follow-up to this, I will already spoil, we'll do a video and I'll go through the build collection and actually talk the inverse way of going over builds and saying why I chose certain specializations for certain builds, or why sometimes for certain builds specializations are just free picks, as that is quite common, especially for red builds. Yeah, let's get started by explaining first what specializations are, and we'll go from there. And to start off, yeah, what are specializations? Most of us know, of course, there are 6 specializations in the game that we pick on top of our build, basically. Just to explain them as well, they unlock after reaching the end of the game at level 30, going into World Tier 1, as the game here, as the guide here also states. So, of course, you don't have them at the base game. Once you reach into the World Tiers or into WONI, you will have them unlocked, at least several of them. There are, of course, 3 original ones, and as we'll go into the game as well, the 3 original ones are the ones on the right, which is Demolitionist, Survivalist, and Sharpshooter. Later on in year 1, all the way back in the base game era, Technician got added, then Gunner, then Firewall. So they've been around forever. There is, if you do not own the Ultimate Edition of the game, you have to unlock the Technician, Gunner, and Firewall. There is a guide for that as well, and seeing as I don't want to just reiterate that, that guide is linked there, which is the link provided in that first paragraph there. And that leads to here, which has a simple guide into all of the field research, as it is called, to unlocking each of them. None of them are really hard. Sometimes you just need to know terminology of the game, especially, for instance, at some point, Scorchers gets used, which is the outcast flamethrower ladies. If you don't know what a Scorcher is, it's kind of hard, but this guide can help getting everything unlocked. It is definitely not hard to unlock everything. For instance, on my latest 3rd account, of course, I have the game knowledge as well for it. I unlocked it basically within the first 2 days of having that account, having reached WONI, basically. And this guide can help as well, as it gives some tips, some tricks, and also where it is and which boss it specifically is. So that is a handy guide on top of this one to have. If you go back to my guide, we'll continue on with what levels specializations, because once you unlock them, of course, you do not start with them fully filled in. You start earning points up to 165 for a full specialization. You get to spend those points on the different nodes that are available here into certain perks, into damage bonuses, into certain skills, and of course upgrades to the specialization weapon or the group bar, the group specialization ammo bar. And some are more important than others, and some are much more recommended than others. But first, to talk about where you can get them from, because there is a little bit of just you have to know, especially for these, is that they can come from leveling. That is your predominant way of leveling up these, as every time you level up, you go up in a SHE level, or just leveling at level 30 as well, of course, where you have field proficiency, but you don't have a continuous leveling system. You do get 3 points. Getting invaded missions done, which is an important one for especially people starting out. Getting your invaded missions done is actually really good. They give blueprints, they give specialization points. For instance, here as well, they give 5 points each, but it's only for the first completion of that week. So whenever you're clearing them out for the first time. So you can get a total of 25 points off of the invaded missions, which isn't meaningless, because also in that same time you're also getting the named items from the invaded missions, you're getting the blueprints from the invaded missions, and you're getting XP from them and leveling. That's actually the important thing with this, is just to, for instance, doing the invaded missions, on top of that you're leveling. Same here as well with the daily bounties. These are the bounties shown in orange, and in also the clan bounties count for this. And those are, for instance, this orange bounty here, it is a daily. It will actually, if you need the specialization points still, it will show a number underneath it as well. The normal and hard give you 3 points. The challenging gives you 5 points. And of course, on top of that, you get the benefits of doing a bounty. Annoyingly, it is not, of course, heroic bounties, so they don't. They're not that great, especially for leveling purposes. But then, if we continue on. The projects, the daily and the week, daily gives you 3 points for most of the dailies, and most of the weeklies give you 5 points. Doing them, of course, as well, you gain expertise, or you gain XP, and from that you level on top of it. So doing basically double dipping like this, doing the invasion, doing the daily bounties, doing projects, is a really good way for leveling them up pretty quickly. And it can go really quick, especially if you're at the start of a week doing the invasion, getting some projects in. But then also control points for each control point 4, so heroic difficulty only, you do get 1 point on top. Of course, doing control points when you're starting out, which is likely the point where you're also doing leveling up the specializations, you also get the blueprints, both from the box and from the completion. So doing control points, once you've done all of this, all of the other things, is a really good way to continue on. It's 1 point, but it adds up over time, because of course you're still leveling in the meantime, and control point 4s are pretty good for, again, the blueprints and such. Summit also actually does have a few points available, but they're for completing 10 and 20 challenges, which honestly is basically a joke. You can get to 10, and if you, especially for instance, reset your challenges and in the meantime kind of keep resetting back to 0 basically, and doing the first easy 10 for 3 points, you're much better off just doing a bunch of control points. But it is there for the completeness of the list. Let's go into the first of the specializations in a second, which is Demolitionist. But first, I want to say that as we have them here with the specializations, we're going to go specialization by specialization. We'll start with the 3 original ones, go to the 3 that then got added a little bit later, although at this point that's like ages ago for all of them, so they're basically all together. The items highlighted in green, as the guide says here as well, they are for the highly recommended parts. So I would recommend getting those parts first off of the specializations. And also with these, the pistols are intentionally omitted. None of them are good. and we're going to just avoid them and having them on this list and cluttering stuff up. The perks and such, it's also, again, not all the perks, for instance, are in here. If they're basically meaningless, I'm leaving them out. So yeah, let's start with Demolitionist in a second. And to start off with Demolitionist, first let's talk about the part that all of them do have, which is the weapons part, which means that you can pick 3 weapon types where you can get plus 15 weapon damage for them. This is just all weapon damage going into the pool of all weapon damage plus specific weapon damage. This is kind of a limiting factor for sometimes having a specialization aligned with certain builds, because you might have a build that, for instance, with especially I find it with Survivalist, sometimes you have it with shotguns and SMGs and LMGs, and then you can't, for instance, have rifles on top of that. Usually with Sharpshooter as well, you want to have marksman rifles and then rifles for the scope, and then pistols, which is likely what you're going to use, for instance, with a hotshot. But then if you want to use it in, for instance, a striker, and you just want to run down a striker, you don't have the slot for ARs for it, so then you have to give up pistols. This is a consideration to be made, and doesn't, of course, get saved with the loadout, which is annoying. But also, it would have been an annoying system to try to incorporate that, I feel. But you just have to make the choices here that align and actually hit the weapons that you want to have. On all of them, one of the weapon types will lead into a specialization attachment. And that's different, of course, for all of them. We'll talk about each one of those. And yeah, let's go back into the guide and we'll go down the list. And here first, we're starting with the specialization weapon on all of them. Some of the ones are highlighted in green, and that means that they're pretty good. And especially the Demolitionist multi-grenade launcher, I would say, is one of the better ones. If used correctly, this is a delete of a wave. There are always waves in groups or in missions or in, for instance, doing territory controls and such. Once you're full up on this, you can basically delete a wave. And that is a very powerful talent. You can just avoid fighting one wave. That makes this actually pretty usable. You do, of course, have to swap to it. You have to use it with all of these. You have to kind of premeditate when you want to use it. You can't just pull it out in a bind, because there is a very long swap time to them. But yeah, this is a great anti-group weapon. It can delete a wave. It can also force enemies out of cover, for instance, as well, which can be quite handy. It scales with explosive damage, which is important to know, as of course, for instance, this specialization also gives you explosive damage, but that also means that, for instance, if you have this on an explosive build, you are increasing its damage output by quite a bit, to the point that it is actually very usable, especially, for instance, in mortar builds. The specialization grenade in this case is a fragmentation grenade. It does apply bleed. It has a medium size, as is not highlighted. It's not a very important part of it. The medkit as well for this one isn't really anything special. It is a normal heal. It will just heal you up in a normal fashion, 100% heal. It gives you also 30 weapon handling for 15 seconds. This can be actually pretty decent, also because weapon handling can also, for instance, let you swap to your grenade launcher. So you can medpack and then quickly swap to your, much quicker swap to your specialization weapon and kind of use that, for instance, to quickly kill a few enemies and fight your way out of being cornered. But in general as well, of course, 15 weapon handling is never bad. This will last you, especially if you're firing right after it, which is you'll likely pop out after having just been healed. You'll have several reloads being affected by this. So it is actually a useful thing. It's just not something that you consistently will use. It's a bonus for sometimes. We also then have the skill. Each specialization has its own skill. In this case, the mortar. The mortar is one of the top skills. It isn't highlighted here because it's not a general use skill. Some skills can be just generally used. The mortar requires its own specific build, and if you're going for the mortar build, you know that the mortar is good at that point. It is a really good group damage. It has its biggest downside is really only that it does have a bit of a screen shake, but it is one of the best explosive skills. We then have the specialization attachment, and yeah, this one is very much actually highlighted. I feel this gets overlooked quite often. You do need to take SMGs for it, but you're very likely to take that or not need multiples here. It is 7 crit chance versus 5. It fits on basically all places where the 5 crit chance mod also fits. So even side slot, it doesn't need, for instance, a long rail as some of the attachments will do. It is just 2 more crit chance. And while 2 more crit chance doesn't sound like much, even on, for instance, Striker, putting in a little, that 2% extra, if you're running, for instance, an Obliterate Striker and you're at the 0 to 15 meter range with a Coyote, this does increase your DPS by quite, well, it's basically 2% extra DPS output. That's not horrendous, especially for the moments that you need it, because, yeah, your crit damage is going up, so, and you're staying at, with the Elmo, for instance, or well, no, you wouldn't have this with the Elmo. With a FAMAS, you would have 52 crit chance. This could take it to 55. That does make a meaningful difference. And of course, it doesn't come at too big of a cost because the specialization as a whole is not bad. The group buff, which is one of the important parts here as well. One of the reasons, for instance, to go Demolitionist on a red build over going Gunner, which is very centered around as well, buffing especially yourself. This does give a group buff. Now, of course, these group buffs, it has to be noted, the group buffs work in a special way where they are affecting your allies and not you. None of these group buffs affect you specifically. And that means that, yeah, you do need to be in a group for people to benefit from them. But in a group, Demolitionist has always been one of the better picks for it. This 5 detalk is just additive detalk to everything else. You give it to your subgroup members. So for instance, in Countdown or in Raids, it's only your subgroup. And they get 5 detalk just on top of everything else. And 5 detalk can be very strong, of course. It ends up being around the 4%, especially nowadays where we don't run Fox's Prayer that much. Going to the major perks, these major and minor perks are not per se the game's major or minor perks. These are what I consider major or minor perks. Leading to that, usually the major perks will be highlighted here. One of the things that it has, it's on that slot there as I'm highlighting it there, is that it can ignore 1 explosion and its damage, very importantly, and its damage, per minute. It has basically a cooldown. You have a buff on your buff bar. Once per minute, you can ignore an explosion. This is very strong. All of those drones in Legendary, all of the explosions that just happen with Black Dusk around, you can ignore one of them. You can just completely ignore 1 explosion. For instance, as well, blowing up weak points. So whenever you're blowing up a weak point on a heavy, True Sun heavy, you can actually do that quite consistently and get away scot-free by just having this, and you're not blowing yourself up. You don't receive the damage, you don't receive the stagger, nothing of that. So that is one of the, that's why I also consider this very much a major perk. Then we have 10% explosive damage, which we'll receive from putting 3 parts into that perk slot there. This, of course, is required, basically making it a required component for a lot of explosive builds, explosive skill builds. Then we go on to minors. On Armor Break, you do actually receive, it reloads the main weapons. So it doesn't reload the sidearm, but the 2 main slots, it reloads them, which is not, of course, the biggest. That's why it's a minor perk. It's not the biggest difference, but that does mean that if you're almost out of ammo and somebody armor breaks you, you do get enough ammo back, and that can here and there save your life. Not as much as, for instance, Firewall's fire can save your life, but here and there you will actually have this save your life, and you might not even notice it because it is one of those things that just happens automatically. It's passive, basically. And you might not even notice that your weapon just got reloaded and that gave you the edge to kill the enemies in front of you. We also have 20% burn resistance here. This can actually be important. You can go up to, on builds especially, that you go up to 80% hazard protection. Picking Demolitionist, and for instance, if you want to go bleed and burn resist, for instance, to counteract the ammo directives, you can actually go then 2 bleed mods going to a 100%, and then picking Demolitionist for its burn resistance. And this made it sometimes in the past the pick for trying to get multiple resistances, especially for Iron Horse Raid. This doesn't get used that much anymore, but it is an important one. It also just means that you will burn less from whenever you run into cleaners and outcasts. We also then have this specialization ammo counter. We'll discuss what this is if you don't know what it is, but just to already talk about what gives the bonuses for that, or gives bonus pips into it. For the case of the Demolitionist, it is killing multiple enemies with explosions, adds 2 to the spec ammo bar. And that means that if you're killing 2 or more, every time it's the first guy, if a solo guy dies, you don't get any. If you kill 2, you get +2 to it. If you kill 3, you get +4. If you kill 4, you get +6. It adds up pretty quickly, and that means that it is actually a great way of generating ammo, especially, of course, with the mortar. Of note, of course, none of these specialization pips will be gotten while you're using the specialization weapon. So you can't get this from the kills of the multi-grenade launcher, because when you have the grenade launcher in your hands or any of the specialization weapons, that pip counter goes away. But of course, if you're running a mortar build or such, you will actually get a lot of this happening. Let's move on to Survivalist. And Survivalist, we'll start off with the spec weapon again, the crossbow. The crossbow has actually a few traits that make it really good for using for specific situations. It's not a general use weapon, but what it can do is break armor plates. Whenever it hits an armor plate, it does heavy damage to it, meaning that against, for instance, heavies and warhounds, generally even up to legendary, if it isn't a named enemy, it will actually pop off the armor plate in one go. That counts for, just popping up the armor plate off the chest of heavies and such. And as you can imagine, that can be a really handy thing to use. Opening them up for damage underneath for your allies. It also applies bleed. It's a minor thing, but can be handy to have. And it scales with explosive damage, and then the bleed scales with the status effect. The specialization grenade is one of the highlights of especially Survivalist. It's an incendiary grenade. They are basically the fire grenades. What they have is a pretty decent radius. They have lingering fire, which is the only grenade that has this trait where you can deploy it and it will stay around for quite a little bit. It isn't one explosion and it's gone. And this makes it really good for sledge, as the continuous fire on the ground will actually apply sledge to anything that spawns. You can already throw it at the door before the enemy spawn, have your sledge weapon equipped. Even if they don't get hit in the initial explosion, as long as they can be set on fire, they will get sledge. For things like warhounds and, for instance, certain the cleaner heavies and such that don't catch on fire, you do need to hit them with the initial hit for it to apply sledge. So that is an important part to know. The specialization armor kit for this one is actually a heal over 5 seconds. It has one quirk, and that is that it also heals your allies within 20 meters. This can be actually used here and there by using it smartly, getting a heal out to your allies, especially, for instance, with the no armor, no regen directive, where the armor doesn't come back after combat. You can actually use this, especially if you have a hard to earn on and are gaining a lot of special ammo, or getting special ammo, and alongside of that armor packs, you can actually use that to heal up your team, because you can just huddle up. Not even really huddle up, but this. And sometimes when you're getting hit together, this will just automatically heal everybody around you, which can actually be beneficial. It's a minor thing, but it is an important one to just generally have and use, and sometimes know, because sometimes if no regen is on, you can actually heal up your team. Not everybody needs to use their own med packs. Just one person with a survivalist can actually heal everybody else. And it will also be a heal to full for everybody else. Then we have the Mender Seeker as the specialization skill. This is a mediocre skill overall, but it can be used solo, but there are actually better ways of healing yourself solo. It is okay for red builds to run around with this, with a Revive Hive and this, just because it is fire and forget, which is an important thing for skills. Then we have the specialization attachment here, which is off of ARs on this one. And yeah, it is 30% optimal range as an attachment. And as I say here, it's plus 30% optimal range is 100% useless. Overall, it's not that optimal range by itself is useless or that this is a meaningless number. It's that it competes with plus ammo. It competes with, even if the plus ammo didn't exist, with plus crit damage. Even stability or such would be much more of a pick, I feel. It is also only for 5.56, so not even for 7.62. And yeah, that makes it that the opportunity cost of it is too great for me. I wouldn't generally never pick it. But that also means that you don't per se have to take ARs here because you can leave out the specialization attachment here. Then as the group buff, this has one of the best group buffs, which is that it gives 10% damage to status-affected enemies for other members of your subgroup. So again, it is for other members within your subgroup, and again, only your subgroup, so not, for instance, an entire raid or the entire countdown, but only your subgroup, and it's not for you. You don't have to be the one applying the status effect. It's for just the enemies being status affected, and enemies are status affected a lot, especially certain factions, as for instance the Outcast, which bring their own CC to work day is every day. They are generally on fire, and you can. This is basically a group buff that even, for instance, if you're running it on a red, it can be very beneficial. And of course, you have means as well in an incendiary grenade, for instance, to make this happen for your allies, especially on certain harder parts with bosses and such. But yeah, it doesn't need to be specifically your applied status effect. It's just the enemy needs to be status affected, which just happens quite a lot. And of course, if you're running Eclipse, for instance, this adds up a lot. Then we have the major perks. One of the things with Survivalist is it doesn't have really great perks. 10% armor protection from elites is what I would consider its best one. But even that is, it is meaningful, especially for PFE builds, where you can use this to get to 80% pretty consistently. For red builds, 10% really doesn't make a meaningful difference, but it's also not nothing. But the perks of other classes are much better. In here, especially the fire grenades and such, and the group buff kind of carry it over that. We do have also 10% skill, haste, and cover. 10% isn't enough, and just this isn't meaningless again, but it's not the greatest thing. We also have 15% outgoing healing, which is just a multiplier on top of everything else. So your repair skills, but also, for instance, if other people have incoming repair, this isn't additive to that. So this is just a 15% over everything else, meaning that this is actually a decent bonus, especially for healing builds. But there are other choices as well there, making it a minor perk. For the specialization ammo counter, it needs to kill status-affected enemies, and in this case, you do need to be the person killing. Adds 3 to the specialization ammo bar. This does mean that, for instance, an Eclipse can make this happen quite a bit, but in general as well, just if you're shooting at enemies and pairing this, for instance, with ongoing directive, where you're applying bleed to basically everything you're shooting, or you should be if you're playing it correctly, means that this will be quite active. This does mean that this is one of the best ones for specialization ammo counter. Let's move on to Sharpshooter. And indeed, on the Sharpshooter, the specialization weapon is a highlight of Sharpshooter. It is the TAC 50. It is a very powerful sniper weapon. It can hit really high damages starting out. And it scales with weapon damage, meaning that on high red core builds or builds with high total weapon damage and such, you do get a really big buff to this. And of course, you can also use this as, for instance, within Headhunter to even stack up Headhunter up higher. As a specialization weapon, this can also really well be paired with red builds because of that. I actually do enjoy running red builds with this, just for instance, with Striker, when you have, let's say, an Elmo and an ACS, which are both not the longest range weapon, not the most precise weapons. Having this as a starting out and just killing one important enemy in the back can be a very powerful tool. And in general, of course, for, again, headhunter builds, it is a core tool for them, together with some of the other perks that we'll go into in a second. Then we have the specialization grenade. In this case, this is the flashbang. This is one of the best grenades. It has a very large radius, so large that actually if you toss it at, for instance, hunters, which are very likely to try to roll out of grenades, in this case, they will try to, because their radius of this is larger than their roll, meaning that you will likely catch them. Then at that point as well, it does almost no damage, but it's important to say almost no damage. It does basically a triple digit damage, where we usually do 6 digits or 7 digits of damage with our weapons. But just that three digits is enough to apply Sledge. And of course, it applies blind as well at that point, meaning that you're blinding and sledging something, usually something very dangerous. You can very easily catch them with this. This makes this one of the best grenades, especially, for instance, if you're going up against hunters. If you're doing the open world hunters, this can actually trivialize them, because you can very easily get this in, get them sledged and blinded for a few seconds, follow that up with a Scorpio. If your world is set to normal, you can likely kill 2 or even 3 hunters before this really wears off. Then we have the armor kit. The armor kit doesn't really do anything special with its heal. It's just a normal heal, healing you up to 100%. And then what it also does, it removes any active status effect at the time, and also then gives bleed, poison, and burn resistance for 20 seconds. This is also the only place where we can get poison resistance, which is something that we have no other way of getting. But it isn't a full immunity against these either. It is a reduction. And yeah, the bleed and the burn can also be helpful if you're already sitting in fire, for instance. You can remove it if you don't want to. If pushing out, for instance, sometimes can be quite hazardous if you're kind of on an island of cover and there's nowhere else for you to go and it's kind of on fire. This will remove the status effect and then also prevent it from applying a full duration burn or bleed to you for 20 seconds afterwards as well. This sometimes does get used, for instance, to try to mitigate things like backfire and such. I wouldn't recommend that. This will kind of, you will miss this when you don't have it and you run it a lot, but it's not a too major of a thing. Then we do have one of the major things, which is the specialization skill for this one, which is the tactician drone. Although I tend up, or what usually ends up being called the recon drone, at least in my bubbles. This is one of the best vision tools, so much so that generally if I'm running Sharpshooter on whatever loadout, I am going to pick this. It is a lingering spotting. On top of that, what it does do, well, first of all, we have to say that it isn't really great for if you need it for flatline or such, because it doesn't need line of sight to the enemies for it to apply a pulse to them. You can deploy it in an area and it will try to spot people, but if they're, for instance, within a building and just peeking out of the windows, they'll get spotted once they pop up, oftentimes. But if it's arranged wrong, so if to the drone they are behind the wall, but to you they're visible, it will not pulse them. But what we will do for the owner of the drone itself is that it will send out there's a red line attaching basically every enemy within its range to the drone. So you can very quickly see which direction the enemies are coming from, even if they aren't pulsed yet, although of course within a certain limit of range. And that gives you basically perfect knowledge of where the enemies are going to come from. And that is invaluable. Knowing where the enemies are coming from is one of the most important things, especially, for instance, for headhunting builds, where you're doing fire directives and trying to just farm quickly. Not just only for your survival, but just for the speed of knowing where the enemies are and killing them. Then we'll move on to the specialization attachment, which is this digital scope. It comes off of rifles, which is a little bit odd. But with that, you do gain a scope which has 2 different zooms. It also has a distance. It has a distance range meter, basically showing you how far enemies are, which can be handy just to know and just to learn ranges and stuff. And it also has a very clear reticle, meaning that you can find your targets very easily, which, for instance, the 8x scopes and such kind of lack. Making this one of the best scopes to put on weapons. but also not the most important part of this. One of the lesser parts of this, likely the weakest group buff of all, is this 10% headshot damage to the other member, or for the other members, not to them, but for the other members of your subgroup. This again is subgroup related, as are all the group buffs of the initial tree, and it is for if they are closer to an enemy than you. Now, this does happen a lot just because of how layout. It's not even just having to stay in the back, but if you go into a big room and 2 people go to the left, 2 people go to the right, the people on the left are closer to the enemies on the left, they will have this bonus. But it is such a small bonus of also only just 10% headshot that it is not a lot, especially adding up, of course, being additive to the headshot of them. It isn't the multiplier on top of anything else. It is just additive to their headshot. It is that headshot again, and then is additive to crit damage, meaning that this isn't a lot. This really isn't a lot. And it's mostly just that the number is so small that makes this a pretty big, a pretty weak group buff. Let's move on to the major perks. First of all, here then we have 15% headshot damage with MMRs and rifles, just always active. In this case, though, because you're likely to go more for headshots with a build that is going to be centered around using Sharpshooter, makes it an okay-ish damage bonus. This on especially headshot-based builds, this might be anywhere between, if you have 300%, this is going to be 5%. No, actually, 200%, this will be 5% extra damage, which isn't meaningless. It is always active, no conditions apply to it. Another one of the good buffs, or the good perks of Sharpshooter, is that you do get 15 stability, and this is for all weapons, meaning that you can use, for instance, weapons like the Bighorn. I do generally put Sharpshooter on builds where I choose to grab those, but also just having this for even things like the FAMAS, which have pretty high vertical recoil, which is what the stability affects. This can help quite a bit, but also, for instance, running AKs. I generally, if I'm running an AK on a red build, I will seriously consider grabbing this. Of course, on the things like Striker, you already have the 15%, meaning that this on top of that you already have that taking the edge off. But for instance, on red builds, this can be a really good pick. Also, after 20 seconds in cover, you receive 5 MMR and 5 rifle ammo. This can be actually used in 5 directives, especially with the Pistolero directive active, to gain some ammo passively while being in cover. Hotshot builds actually benefit a lot from this. Slowly, you will just build up ammo as you're in cover, as you're just taking enemies down and control points and such. You will just build up ammo, and this makes it a lot easier to, for instance, run with 5 directives. Then we also have a little bit of bonus armor in cover. This is not meaningful, but it's also not meaningless. This can also sometimes be used for testing purposes. This is actually why I have it in here. For testing purposes of when you need bonus armor in some way to test, for instance, Intimidate or such. This can be an easy way of getting that, as you just go into cover and you have bonus armor. The spec ammo counter of this one is headshot kills, and headshot kills each add 1 to the spec ammo bar. These headshot kills, just adding 1, means that every kill will then give you 2, basically. If you do it with a headshot kill, this can add up pretty quickly, especially if you're using Determined, which will still count as a headshot kill. But it is slower than some of the other ones, especially, for instance, Survivalist with eclipses. But this does still mean that, for instance, if you have Hard to Earn on, or when Hard to Earn is available, this will help quite a bit, actually, especially if you're running hotshot builds. Yeah, let's move on to Tactician next. And indeed, on to Technician. For the specialization weapon, we have the P017 launcher. It isn't the greatest tool. It isn't also as horrendous as some people make it out to be. I would say it is mediocre compared to the rest. It is okay for opening up fights, especially. You can actually use this as a tool where you, at the start of a fight, just mark multiple enemies, fire, and especially aiming high so that the missiles go up and come down on top of their heads. This scales with explosive damage. It can be okay, especially for this opening up on fights. It isn't a great general use tool just because it needs to mark enemies before it can fire, meaning that all the other tools are better than it, but this can still be very useful, especially for against warhounds and such for opening up fights. You can just use this to delete a warhound and focus on other important things in that fight. We'll go on to the specialization grenade. This is one of the most important ones. This is parts of this specialization, which is EMP grenades. It is a really large radius. It isn't as large as the flashbang, just a little bit smaller. And it will disrupt enemies, of course, against warhounds and the mini tanks and stuff. That will completely disable them, but especially as well against things like grenadiers and such. They can't actually fire when they're disrupted. So, for instance, if you have a True Sons Heavy, if you open up the fight, for instance, with an elite patrol, if you open up the fight with this specialization grenade, you can avoid actually getting a grenade in your face right away, even before you, and then you can, of course, take your time to blow up their backpack to make sure that no grenade comes afterwards. It has a pretty long duration, longer duration disrupt than anything else that we have available skill-wise. Even with high status effect, this grenade actually very consistently competes with them. We'll go on to the armor kit, which is actually one of the worst ones, which is that it's a normal heal, but then also heals nearby skills, nearby proxy skills, things like the turret or the drone, deployed skills, and world presence skills. This isn't really great, mostly because also the scaling of it is pretty low. It doesn't heal them all the way to full. It gives them a chunk, especially on a 6-tier skill. This isn't that much. We'll move on to the specialization skill for this one, which is the Artificer. And the Artificer is one of the great tools of this. It is, again, kind of with the mortar, that's why it's not highlighted here. It is very skill or build specific. So for the mortar, you really need to have the mortar build to make use of it. The Artificer here as well, again, needs specific builds that are kind of designed for it. This, of course, gets used, for instance, in Oxy builds, and of course, one of my favorites, the tech tanks. The tech tanks are basically built around the Artificer Hive being there, healing the shield. It can buff, it can heal skills. It does nothing to players really, but just only to skills. One important thing to know is that, especially for yourself and a shield, it doesn't need to be actually deployed. Just from your back, it will send out charges. Also, for other players in the team, if they have handheld skills like the sticky or like an fire cam or a foam, it will actually send a charge out to them as well when they pull it out. And yeah, it can be a really good tool for repairing and buffing skills, and shields being one of the predominant ways that I personally use this for. It is a very important tool to do very important things, but it needs a specific setup for it. Then we have the specialization attachment, which here is also again tied to rifles. It is the linked laser pointer. This linked laser pointer, whenever you ADS, it will pulse the enemy. This has been reduced from 20 seconds to 6 seconds with recent changes. But it is really good for flatline. This is really the way to set up for flatline over anything else. For instance, the recon drone sometimes gets recommended. I wouldn't say that is consistent enough. Just running pulse, again, also not consistent enough, I feel. Running a heartbreaker and going for headshots, not everything has a head. This generally works great. Sometimes it, of course, doesn't pulse, as we all know. Sometimes you need to just release ADS and re-ADS for it to remember what it does. But this is very much one of the best specialization tools. And on top of that, even without flatline, just for the availability of vision, just seeing what the enemy is, and what the enemy is doing, especially in a pulsed way where you can kind of see what animations they're in, you can very easily see from that they're about to run from cover to cover, that they're about to toss a grenade at you, that they're kind of like cowering and before popping out. That is just generally really important information. Then we have the group buff, which here I have highlighted. It is situationally one of the most important group buffs. It isn't a group buff to stats. What it is, though, is Faraday field. This Faraday field affects deployed skills. So in the case for this one is, for instance, all of the hives, all of the turrets, the remote pulse, all work for it. The decoy does not work for this, even though technically usually gets counted as a deployed skill, but not for this one. But what it does is within a radius around it of 5 meters, it will have a Faraday field, and this will make it so that any agent that is within that range, outside of subgroup as well, so the entirety of a raid can have this, the entirety of a countdown group can have this, it prevents shock and disrupt. And as you can imagine, disruption at some points is deadly, shock at some points is deadly, or can you can very much speed up a fight by avoiding shock. Specifically, for instance, the shock at Keener fight, at both the Marauder and later on at Keener himself, when he shocks, you can completely bypass this by having this shock. Same for parts of the raids. This disruption, for instance, in Countdown, with a coordinated team and a well-placed hive, one person can provide disrupt protection for the entirety of the team, making this one of the most important group buffs. Even though it isn't per se a buff, it is a very important group tactic. Then we have the major perks for this one. Just because it gets a lot of great things up there, it doesn't really have that many great perks following it up. One of it, there is really only one, and that is that you do get +1 skill tier, where you get one skill tier for free, basically, from the specialization, meaning that if you have the specialization, you can have one more red core or one more blue core than you generally would with all of the other ones, and still reach, for instance, skill tier 6. But even on a full red build, just having this one skill tier, this can be an extra skill tier for the shield, this can be 2 charges on your hive, this can be an extra charge on your foam or fire cam, a little bit more effectiveness out of whatever skill you're using. This is actually a really powerful perk. Skill tiers are very powerful. Then we have some of what I would consider the minor ones. We do have the choice of picking either, and this is the only place where we have a place where outside of the weapons, where we also have to pick 3 basically, where we have a choice between going either skill damage or going skill repair for this. And it is, generally, if you're it kind of depends on what builds you have. I generally have this always set to skill damage, just because I do run skill damage builds quite a lot, and sometimes I even run Technician, for instance, with Eclipse or Drone hybrids and stuff. And I just leave it there. If I'm healing, 10% more healing isn't really going to make a big difference. And then also we have from one of the perks, we have 12% damage versus mechanical. So against turrets, against warhounds, this can be quite meaningful. All the way in the past, this used to actually be why we would pick this. And when on Razorback fights, for instance, 12% is meaningful. It is very strong. If you are running Technician and others aren't, and you're like all on Strikers or something, it does behoove you to actually go after the warhounds and such and the mini tanks, because you do deal more damage to them, so you can kill them faster than your allies, and then your allies can point their guns at the squishies. But also, it isn't that big of a difference. It is always active. There is no conditionality there, but it is actually a pretty handy thing to have. But in comparison to some of the other things we will have, especially on Gunner in a second, we'll see that it is minor. Then we'll scroll back down as something weird happened there. And we'll end up with the specialization ammo counter bonuses here, which is that destroying proxies or mechanicals adds a 1 to the spec ammo bar. Generally, kills will add +1. So they, for instance, mechanicals in the forms of warhounds will count, but mechanicals in the form of, for instance, mini tanks that are actually technically proxies will not actually add +1 to the counter normally. In this case, they do. So killing turrets and such will help out a little bit with this. But also, for instance, the EMP grenades that Black Tusk medics toss at you, those will count. So this does add up a little bit more into that specialization ammo counter, but not in a great deal. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. As next up is Gunner, one of the favorite picks for a lot of people, especially for striker builds and such. As we'll again start out with the minigun being the specialization weapon. The minigun is actually pretty good. It is a really good damage dealer. It is an LMG that you have on your back as an extra. You should use this more. If you're not. If you are, you're fine. You're good. The people that aren't using this at all, you should use this more. It is... The swap to it, of course, is pretty prolonged. The swap back off of it is also pretty prolonged. But for clearing out one spawn, this is 150 rounds at 1,000 RPMs with pretty good damage comparable to the top-end weapons that we have available. With decent enough optimal range, you should be using this quite consistently. The only reason it's actually not marked up here is that generally as well, you have a main weapon that does plenty of damage. There are points where there are big waves, especially where this would actually be the better choice, just because you have a very long firing time at 1,000 RPMs at 150 rounds. That should be used more, I feel. The only big downsides of it is while you have it out, you can't run, you can't use cover, you can't scale over anything. And it skills with weapon damage, so it works better on full red builds than not. But generally, Gunner as well, you would want this to be on full red build or pretty high red builds. Then we'll go to the specialization grenade, which is the riot foam grenade. This is the smallest radius of the grenades. It is, of course, foam and makes for a decent CC. And if a well-placed grenade of this type can actually be really good. It does apply foam, of course, to the enemy, keeping them in place, especially if you can catch them facing away from you where they can't turn around. This can be really good. Of note as well, this is the only grenade that doesn't do damage at all, and this is the only grenade that cannot apply sledge. All of the other grenades can. It is a pretty good tool. Oftentimes you can just use this to flush enemies out of cover or capture suppressed enemies, and they will usually not roll away and then finish them off. Then we have the armor kit. The armor kit is really good for this 30%. There's a normal heal, and then on top of that, you do get 30% bonus armor for 10 seconds. Sometimes for testing purposes, this can be really good, but also in gameplay, if you're getting hit, which will likely be the reason that you're healing, you're coming out of that with an extra 30% bonus, so you can actually bonus armor so you can push up right after you heal up. You have a little bit of bonus armor to play with and lose, basically. And it lasts for 10 seconds, which is actually pretty long. It is long enough for you to actually pop out of cover and use this up a little bit. Then we have the specialization skill in the form of the Banshee Pulse. The Banshee Pulse is really good. It is one of the best skills for just simple CC. It goes through walls. It is you have to click and hold to activate it, and you can hold it as it narrows and becomes. It goes from wide and short to narrow and long, and it will apply disorient on enemies, and it can do so through walls and stuff as well, making this actually it is. The only skill that applies disorient. So for instance, disorient challenges and stuff, this is invaluable. For instance, as well, sometimes just running an easy eclipse where you can starting out this is a really recommended skill for eclipses, for instance, from my end, because you can use it through walls, be completely safe, and still hit enemies. You just have to know that it has a charge up mechanic. And for a skill, this is likely one of the best general use skills. You can just slap this onto a red build and get great results out of it. It also pulses the enemies, giving their location if they survive your initial onslaught for this. Then we have the specialization attachment. This is the large pouch. This is the pouch for LMGs, for Big Mag LMGs. All of the LMGs that are 50 rounds and above have a pouch over a magazine. The L86 and the RPK, for instance, don't fall into that category. They have magazines. For all the other ones, we have the large pouches here, and this is plus 50 ammo, where the one that we have available generally is a plus 35. And this can be very important if you are running, for instance, MG5s or M60s and such. The RPK and LAD6 being the favored LMGs over some of the other ones, especially I find the MG5 still competes, but most of the other ones, not so much outside of the good times where I do use this. Making this, just because of the usage of the LMGs, not the most important thing. Generally, you can go with a RPK on a build, and just you don't per se need to be gunner. Then we have the group buff, which is also actually a pretty good group buff, as it is a 5% ammo reserves per 60 seconds, and that is for both subgroups. This is, as it says there, both subgroups, so for instance, the entire raid, and this, of course, multiple gunners will stack on top of each other and provide a decent amount. Now, 5% isn't the biggest amount. This is less than a third of a mag generally. Or less than half of a mag generally, depending on weapon types. But just over time, this adds up. It is, you still generally will need ammo, but the amount of time you can go in between ammo, especially for instance in raid situations, having several gunners there is actually beneficial, especially on longer fights like Razorback. Then we have the major perks. One of the most important perks of this is that it has 10% armor on kill. It is the general stat of armor on kill. It is additive to the other armor on kills. And this works, of course, for instance, as well for skill kills and such, in the same way that armor on kill does. And that makes it also a pick, for instance, outside of even using it just on red builds. But of course, on red builds, for instance, think of as well for close range builds like the Hunter's Fury, this can make this part a choice. But generally, there is a better one for close range things, as we'll go into Firewall next. But this can, in 10 kills, you will heal yourself up. Although the thing is with that as well, as we say, with 10 kills, you can heal yourself back out. That's also 10 kills. Like if in 10 kills, you're likely going to get hit again. It is meaningful, especially when stacked with Palisade, taking it down to 5 kills, filling you all the way back up. But it isn't the most important thing, but it is the major perk of Gunner. The other one is that on kill, we get 5% rate of fire for 5 seconds. This is pretty good, as especially if you're killing groups. After your first kill, especially solo, of course, this is an on-kill talent, meaning that solo, where you're killing everything, you're much more likely to have this active. And then you go from enemy to enemy. So after the first one, you will have the 5% rate of fire. This is rate of fire, of course, is additive. So for instance, in the way of Striker, this isn't the full 5% damage increase, but a 4 point something damage increase. But that's still 4 point something that you're just getting for getting a kill. Especially in groups, this kind of falls away. And that's also what Gunner in general for me has, is that in groups, I would generally pick Survivalist, for instance, or having at least a demo extra in there over having multiple gunners in the same groups, as they provide better group buffs. Because while these group buffs are okay and personal buffs are okay, giving 5% detox to me outweighs all of these. Then we also have as well for yourself 10% armor reserves per 60 seconds. This is the group gets 5%, you get 10%. 10% is at least basically a mag, so you're getting a mag extra per 60 seconds, but you can go through ammo much faster than that. It does help, of course. It means that you can be longer in between boxes, especially if you're roaming around in the open world. You might go a minute or two between activities. You're getting 2 mags extra from that. You don't have to resupply as often. We also have 10% weapon handling when standing still for longer than 1 second. This is a pretty good one, but I just end up being too fidgety for this. If you are too fidgety like me, this isn't active that much. You should remember to get this more, but also the weapon handling isn't of that great of a addition of 10%. Also, every third reload is 50% faster. And all of these together, all of these perks together, is one of the reasons that Gunner gets recommended as often as it does. But I would also recommend, especially in group setups, to consider some of the other specializations. That's why we're kind of going through this. Then we also have the specialization ammo counter, which is that killing multiple enemies without releasing the trigger adds 1 to the spec ammo counter. And yeah, this just means holding down the trigger and going from enemy to enemy. This is an acquired trait, especially you have to kind of learn this. And of course, with higher difficulties, you kind of need LMGs, or well, nowadays the Elmo kind of fits that role as well, of being able to kill 2 enemies with 1 mag quite easily. Of course, if you're spraying and praying into a spawning wave, you might get all of them to happen with this. It is a +1, so it's not the biggest deal. You're getting then 2 per kill, basically. Let's move on to the last one. And last, but definitely not least, is Firewall with its specialization weapon, the KB Jetstream Flamethrower. The Flamethrower is a really good weapon as well. It has okay damage, but on top of that, it has good CC, good crowd control. This can be used for a spawn that is happening once you've built up a little bit of ammo. You can just, if you know where they are spawning, you can kind of just capture a wave as they are spawning. One of the downsides, though, to it is that it does not go through door boundaries with its fire, so you can't capture enemies on the inside of doors. As long as they don't come out, you're not doing damage to them, which you just need to know, and at that point kind of offset yourself. But especially if you're going, for instance, 1-to-1 against the named, just using this, even though you get a reduction against named enemies with specialization weapons of 50%, this can just still provide you a CC, and then you can swap to a Scorpio or just your main weapon and just burn them down from that point on. It scales with weapon damage for its hits and then status effect for its fire. We then have the specialization grenade of this one, which is the cluster grenade. This is one of the lesser usable grenades. It does have multiple small radii, as is the mold. I totally had to Google that just to be sure. A multiple small radii for multiple parts. It just clusters into several grenades after the first one. This can make it actually somewhat useful, especially if you're using something like a collector or mad bomber to increase the radiuses of them. But they are pretty weak, and they're not generally useful. You can use them, of course, in the same way as all grenades to get some enemies out of cover, and with them bouncing around, you might actually get several enemies out of cover. But they're so inconsistent in that way that they're not really that handy. They can overlap multiple together as well. This should be noted, where they can do multiple times damage to the same enemy. You can throw them, for instance, in a corner to achieve this a little bit better, but the enemy then also needs to be in a corner for you to have the ability to do so. Then we'll go to the armor kit. The armor kit of this one is one of the better ones. It gives 200% health and armor over 10 seconds. I might think, wait, why does it give me more than 100%? How can I have more? Well, you could lose some. You could pop the armor kit, and over this 10 seconds, you could run out and lose 100% of your armor, so 1 total of your armor. And then still, if you've killed whatever you're going to kill, you still get to heal to full over the next 5 seconds. If you kill them in the first 5 seconds and you lose your armor, all your armor up to that point, you can. But of course, you have to remember that while this is kind of handy, especially against chip damage things, this isn't actually that handy against things that can take you to health gate in one hit, like snipers. If they're taking you to your health gate and you've lost your health gate, and then you met back like this and then pop out and think you're invincible, you're very much not. If your health gate is gone and the enemy has the ability to take you through your health gate that doesn't exist at that point anymore, you're dead. But in a lot of situations, this is the go-to. This is also why in DZ or PvP, this is Firewall basically gets picked generally for this and one other thing that we'll come to right now, which is the Striker Shield, which is the Specializations skill. The Striker Shield, not to be confused with Striker, the gear set, because why have multiple names, right? This is a small shield to mean that it isn't the bulwark shield, it isn't the large shield, but it has a damage buff for self and group. So this is also the group buff partially of this. It does have its own group buff separately, but the shield can be used as a group buff, and it is also for yourself as well. It is the buff of it does apply to yourself as well. This can be from anywhere from 11 to 12%. This depends on the mods that you have for it. You do need to, there's a mod slot for 5%, there's a mod slot for 1%. And then on top of that, the skill tiers that it is at will mean a bigger damage buff. But it basically, yeah, goes between 11 and 12 and something percent. And that is per enemy within the forward cone of it. When you pull it out, you have a forward cone, you have a backwards cone. The forward cone, the amount of enemies in there will count as each a separate instance to increase this buff. And this is an additive to itself, multiplicative to everything rest buff. So it's a separate multiplier in effect. And this is very strong as the enemy, as it is applied also to your allies that are standing in the cone behind you. It is, yeah, as you can imagine, this can add up pretty quickly. If with 5 enemies in front of you, that is an extra 50% easily. That's, well, 60% actually at that point for yourself towards the enemies, meaning that you can kill at least one very quick. That, for instance, as well synergizes really well with Hunter's Fury, because once you kill that first one, everybody else around them is disoriented. One thing of note as well, things like shock traps or the grenades, the deployed grenades kind of thing that Rikers have and rogues and hunters often use, where they toss a grenade, but it's basically a mine on the ground. Those do count for this as well. So especially think of the lovebirds where shock traps get deployed. You can very much get a really big bonus out of this, together with, for instance, a supercharge, taking it to 6 skill tiers. Then we have the specialization attachment, which comes off of having shotguns on this one. The specialization attachment is actually 10% crit damage, but it does require a long rail. It does require a long rail on the weapon itself, long under barrel rail, meaning that this doesn't fit on a lot of the weapons you would want it to fit on, a lot of SMGs especially, as a lot of the popular ones don't have long rails. Really only the Vector 45 of the popular ones has the long rail for this. But this is really the only crit damage that mod on weapons that should be used. You should generally use all crit chance on the weapon. You can, because even in the stead of using stability or accuracy mods, what you could do is take crit chance on the weapon and take weapon handling on the build. That's much more of a practical thing to do. Also, you should never really take other crit damage mods, as they're 5% crit chance versus 5% crit damage. You should generally be able to lose some crit chance off of the build, pull it onto the weapon, and put crit damage onto the gear, where it's 6 versus 12 instead of 5 versus 5. But this is the only one that is adequate enough to be fit onto weapons, but it just doesn't fit on a lot of weapons. On shotguns it can, of course, but shotguns don't have the crit chance generally to fit this. On SMGs, where you can, it's basically only the AUGs, the Vector 45, and 2 of the MP5s, also actually only 2 of the AUGs, have the ability to equip this. Of the pertinent ones, one of the UMPs can as well. But yeah, that makes this somewhat awkward to use, but an important one. Again, this can actually be a beneficial thing to have. Then we have the group buff, and that is that it is 10% increased damage to enemies within 10 meters of you for all allies. And this wording of it being all allies instead of group means that it's both subgroups. This is also making this one of the best group buffs if ran with the correct build. Because if you're sitting in the back with a striker and you're not in the range of any of the enemies within countdown, let's say, this isn't useful. If you're running Hunter's Fury and you're in the face of all the enemies, or PFE, for instance, and you're in the face of all enemies within countdown, and you're applying this to all of your allies, that can be very powerful. This situationally can be one of the biggest group buffs. This is also the reason why generally, for instance, for incursions, we pick 2 firewalls overlapping each other on the reds, so that one of them gives a group buff to the other, and the other one gives a group buff back to the one, so that both of them have it active that way. Going on to the major perks of Firewall, we have 30% armor and kill. This used to be 100%. They reduced it by quite a bit for this. It is still quite a bit. You do, of course, within 3 kills, get your health back. This also is one of the few ways to get health on kill. One of the other famous ways is, of course, Hunter's Fury. But sometimes health on kill can actually be a handy thing, for instance, where you're poisoned situationally, you know, once every 1,000 hours or something. You might save yourself by killing an enemy when you were at health gate, but you got poisoned in some way in DCD, for instance, and you killed an enemy and you got health on kill, and that saved you from going down. But it is just much rarer to have this, so it is actually handy. Also, we have burn enemies within 5 meters on armor break. So whenever you armor break, the enemies within 5 meters of you will all catch on fire. That is really powerful. This will save your life quite often, as especially, of course, the whole setup of this is close range. Basically, all of the buffs are for close range. The specialization is also, the shield should be noted as 10 meters. All of those things are kind of great for being close range. And then this is a way to save yourself if it goes wrong a little bit. Because then, as well as one of the minor perks, we have 20% burn duration. We got brought up as a reason to, for instance, pick this on Eclipse quite often. I feel with the Survivalist's damage bonuses to allies, especially in groups, where I generally run Eclipse more often, I prefer a lot of the bonuses there. Solo, if I were to run Eclipse solo, which I personally don't much, but you know, for some reasons you might, for instance, for some challenges or such, or just proficiency in it. If you're running it solo, this 20% burn duration is definitely worth it for that. Then we have the specialization ammo counter and what it adds. In this case, it is and what adds to it. Killing enemies within 10 meters add 1 to the spec ammo bar, making this one as well pretty good and pretty consistent on filling up the specialization ammo bar, because every enemy that you kill, generally you should be within 10 meters of them to use your striker shield, to use your under bonuses. You're adding 1 from the kill and then 1 extra from this. One thing of note as well with this one is that this is the only specialization sidearm that we're going to talk about, because it isn't the pistol, it is a shotgun, it is a fire starter sawn off. This allows for enemies that would normally be immune to fire, like warhounds, like cleaner heavies, like a lot of the mechanicals, to be set on fire. It reduces the enemy's resistance to fire when they are hit by this. It is a very short duration in between shots, so you have to really quickly go from one to the other. One of the reasons to use this is actually for sledge for some enemies, where the initial hit will always apply sledge with a flame grenade, for instance, from somebody else. Although this you have to coordinate, of course, because you don't have the flame grenades. But if you're coordinating with somebody else, they can toss a flame grenade, and then you can reduce, because you can do it for somebody else as well. It is a debuff on the enemy. It is not only for you. But for general personal use, I just find this clunky. I would rather have Survivalist, and to the enemies that are like that, like heavies, like warhounds, I would just crossbow them and take their armor off, and from that point on, start weakening them further. But yeah, just because it has a special purpose there, we'll talk about that one there. Let's move on to talking about the thing that we've actually already talked about a little bit, which is the specialization group counter, which is poorly very, very misunderstood and very poorly understood. And that together makes it poorly misunderstood, which is inverse of what I mean, right? Double negative. Let's go talk about it. And yeah, indeed, this group specialization ammo counter, or spec ammo counter, as we're shortening that to. This is this ammo bar on the left side of your UI here. A lot of people don't know what it is for, and it fills up on kills, and goes up and then fills up all the way and then empties again. And it isn't per se clear. The game does have a good tooltip that pops up once you get your specialization weapon to explain this, but of course, reading is, I mean, I didn't read it either. Don't feel bad. But yeah, the group bar is 15 parts. It is 15 pips that go into here as it fills up. It starts empty, fills up. It is group wide. It is every person of the group will be on the same amounts. Even when you join into the group, if they already have a few of these, you will start off with that. So it is consistent for everybody in the group. And once it is full, it will, on every kill, we'll add one, and then all of the things that we noted, as for instance, the specialization ammo counter for here, for Firewall is still up there. Where killing an enemy within 10 meters adds 1 to the specialization ammo bar. Every kill of an enemy, so not a proxy, will add 1 into this, and doing any of the things that are required by the specializations adds the amount that they state. So, for instance, yeah, on that one, if you kill an enemy within 10 meters, we're both getting 1 for the kill, and then 1 on top of that because the enemy was within 10 meters. And then, for instance, Survivalist, which adds in quite a bit, is killing a stated affected enemy adds 3. So this adds up really quickly because you can get 4 per enemy pretty quickly. This is, of course, the spec ammo counter from the specializations is only for the person performing the kill. So you need to be the kill maker, for instance, when you are when you are a gunner, for instance. If somebody else gets the last shot and they are still within 10 meters, you don't get that bonus. But yeah, every kill adds in 1. So every 15, you will every 15 enemies, you will fill up once anyway. Once it is full, the next skill, it will start flashing. And then once it is full, the next enemy that is killed will drop special ammo. And of course, on top of that, the things like hard to earn, which is tied to this mechanic as well, alongside of the special ammo, they will also then drop a med pack. So doing the things that this requires, for instance, when hard to earn is active, is very important. But in general as well, the specialization weapons are generally worth using. If you can do the thing that they require, you are better off doing it. It is very noticeable, especially, for instance, if you have an explosive build in the group and an eclipse in the group, getting a lot of added amounts into this, that you get a ton more specialization ammo over if it is just a bunch of people just running, for instance, gunner and not doing the thing that gunner wants, which is not releasing the trigger in between kills. That is just 15 kills. But if they are holding it, they get 2 per kill, and it goes twice as fast, for instance. And yeah, this can be an important trait to know and just to understand, and especially for hard to earn, but in general as well, so you know when special ammo is coming, and just also so you know what that thing is, as it is one of those questions that pops up the most. Yeah, let's go on to one last part, which is the general tips. And we'll round it out here with some general tips, which seem obvious once you've done it, but for people starting out, especially. So yeah, for leveling the specializations, just equip any spec. You need to have the specialization equipped at the time that you're receiving the points to have this, to gain the points of it. So if they're not equipped, you don't get points for them when you're leveling, when you're doing the invaded mission. And yeah, you just do your projects, you do your invaded missions with them, and all of your daily bounties overall. That will add in quite a bit of points. On top of that, you're leveling while doing all of that. It is general good content just to get done. The bounties, as well as when you're starting out, can be a good source of credits, so you get that a little bit for recalibrating some pieces later on. And yeah, they give extra easy points while leveling, and you basically want to stack up on those. And then if you need more, if you're done with all of those during a week, then control points becomes the next best thing, where you also are getting blueprints from it. That can, on its own, be very valuable, and then you're getting the extra point, especially on heroic. You do need to do them on heroic. It doesn't give them on any other difficulty. where blueprints still do get given at challenging difficulty at control point 3s, you do need to be control point 4 for that one extra point. And that one extra point doesn't seem much, but when you're leveling and you're doing basically 3 control points for 2 levels, depending on directives and such, or maybe even more, that one extra point does add up and gives a little bit extra. Yeah, and then afterwards you just have to focus on leveling, and leveling can be done very quickly, of course. Doing 100 levels within a 3-4 hour session isn't outside of the realm of reason, as we've often done. You do need to know what you're doing to do that with having certain builds, which of course you won't have starting out, but just to give a context to how fast that can go. And of course, 100 level would be 300 points, will be enough for basically 2 specializations done within that. But of course, that is like just hard grinding. You don't want to to do that unless you really want to. And yeah, spending your points. I would always recommend spending it first on the weapon types that you're going to use. Mostly just one weapon type starting out. That will take 15 points to get it maxed out. Once you have that, then going on to the recommended items. And with the recommended items, that is why some of these are highlighted in green, which are the things that I consider to be more important than other parts. I would recommend getting those things first and then going from there. But especially getting one of the weapon types, getting that 15% weapon damage, especially when you're starting out, you also don't have the watch. Your rolls on your cores will be worse. So it is beneficial to get that in. You won't have any expertise as well, of course. And important one to know as well, you can respec at any time fully in the entirety of the thing. You will also get enough points to get outside of the weapons and outside of the choice where you have it with technician, outside of the choice between skill damage and the healing and the weapons. You do get everything else. Everything else will be unlocked for you, so you don't have to pick between having the Faraday or having the bonus against the enemies. And what you can do as well, intermediately or when you're leveling it up and you're not at full yet, you can actually respec a single element. So if you, for instance, want to remove, let's say, SMGs here from technician here as I have it, and you want shotguns instead, you can respec just that element. The other button here is respec, and this will remove all the points out of here. And that, of course, can be really annoying, especially when you're full, to remove all of them and then have to put all of them back in. But yeah, you can just put them into there and then go back and put them back into the other one if the need arises. So yeah, you can move around between things quite easily, and that is important to know, as that isn't how, of course, it generally is laid out. We'll go back to, as well, boosting a character. So if you're doing a DC start, you don't get any of the specializations unlocked in any specific way. The unlocks for the other 3 specializations is account-wide, so you don't need to do them on alts, the field research. But when you're boosting a character and doing a New York start, or at any point you choose to do the boost to New York, you will actually receive full points in the original 3 specialization, which is the Demo, Survivalist, and the Sharpshooter, giving you full points into them, making that grind a little bit shorter for alts, especially if you're going to do alts and you don't want to redo that grind. You can bypass it with this, although, of course, you do get the mark of it being a boosted character at the login screen, but only you see that and you don't care, right? I do, I personally do, but if you don't care about those kind of things, you can just leave that out. And importantly as well, specialization weapons nowadays only do 50% damage against named enemies. This was a change that they implemented, as in the past, what would happen on the bosses is that everybody would pull out their specialization weapons, usually back then Demo, especially before. The other ones were added, the later 3 were added in, and would just delete the named. That was kind of boring. I kind of agreed with this change as well. And yeah, they have removed a lot of the damage of that, but that also means that outside, for instance, using the crossbow to still heavily damage armor plates on bosses that have it, on heavies, or warhounds that have that, named bosses, there really isn't a reason to use specialization weapons over normal weapons, because even attack 50 will not do what even a normal high-end weapon will do against named enemies, just because of this reduction. Same for the grenade launcher and such. It's basically not worth using against them outside of very specific reasonings, as I gave there, for instance, with the crossbow, which still deals enough damage that, yeah, now instead of one crossbow bolt against the chest to pop it off, you'd need two. Basically, the 50% reduction. But that still helps quite a bit and still heavily damages it, even with one hit, even if it doesn't pop it off. One thing of note as well is that named enemies include rogue agents. So rogue agents are named generally. Hunters is a mishmash. For instance, the hunters in Countdown aren't, the hunters in the open world aren't. But some of the hunters in missions, for instance, the latest one in the Kelso Manhunt mission, is named. He actually is named. The difference between them is the coloring of their health and armor bar. That's where you can perceive from where they have it. And also, of course, the names actually have a name above them. Even if it says Hunter only or Rogue Agent, they have a name above it. And that does matter, of course, for the purposes of this. For instance, as well, the Summit Hunters are not named, but yeah, Rogue Agent encounters are named enemies. So you could actually very effectively use attack 50 in Countdown, or for instance in the fight at the top of the summit, to just very quickly heavily damage a hunter. And yeah, the last one is this one, that by not putting the points into the pistol element, as we have within all of the specializations, a specialization pistol, if it is removed from them, you can avoid or deconstruct the pistols and not have them clutter your inventory. You show that as well in the game. So for instance here, one of the reasons as well why we didn't talk about any of the specialization weapons is all of them suck. We can be pretty simple about that. Even the one that sucks the least, which is the fire starter, which has a thing that it can do, this to me is still meaningless, just because it isn't an effective thing to do to enemies. Outside of that, some of these other ones, of course, all of them come with a perfect talent. You would think some of them might be useful in some way, but outside of the survivalist one, which has detox, and this might be the only one worth using for perfect sadist. Outside of that one, all of them don't have detox as their stat, and of course, you're generally just much better off with the TDI card custom for that extra skill tier. And damage-wise, just an high end with full stat, with detox, with normal preservation, I would pick that over this, even though preservation at least got a buff for its perfect. But if you need Spike or something, or you need Optimist, I would, especially for instance for this Optimist one, if you had detox here, you would do more damage with that weapon, with the normal Disseros. It would have one mod slot less, of course, but you would do more with a D50 with just normal Optimist than this weapon ever could, really. But what you can do as well is actually mark them for deletion. Normally, this you weren't able to for quite a long while. Now you can deconstruct them as well. If you have the points in the specialization, which I still have here, if I now, for instance, load a loadout which has, let's say Sharpshooter, we'll equip aces there. I received my Sharpshooter specialization pistol. We can of course delete it every time, but what you can do as well is what I do with all my characters. If for instance we let's pick that, we'll respec this element away, not fill it in, not spend those 10 points, those 10 final points. Let's deconstruct that Sharpshooter pistol. If I go on to a build like my Eclipse, which has Survivalist equipped, if I equip this, it's not coming back. I don't have access to the pistol. It's no longer coming back. By setting up all of your specializations this way to just not have this, element built in, those pistols will just, once you have deconstructed them, will not be coming back. And yeah, that just saves on a little bit of clutter. They do not take inventory space. That is important to know. They never took inventory space, so this number isn't affected by them, but it is just handy for the clutter. So yeah, that was this very long guide into a very long subject of specializations. I hope you found at least something informative in here, as it was a long one. And of course, the written guide will always be available. Of note as well, I will keep an updated date on there. So check with that if it is been updated more recently. And of course, all of the other guides are already somewhat in that folder as well. So you can go and check them out with the link below. As a hint already, the next one is going to be on skills, and I'm also already working on one, for instance, here for countdown. I'll go through all of the game modes, specifically countdown, summit, and then descent. I'm going to make a guide for each of them, kind of laying out how I would recommend doing them and what their benefits are and such. And yeah, so this will be upcoming, as I really wanted to do a few new in-depth guides, as it has been a while, as the last one was on the damage calculations. Although eventually as well, I do want to do one on burst and sustained DPS, and as those are contentious subjects once again, as a lot of people I feel don't understand them well. But yeah, those are in the future. Likely following up this video, I will make a follow-up video that is kind of tied to this subject, which is we'll go to the build collection, and I'll actually, on top of this, explain why for certain builds I picked certain specializations, or why some builds really don't care about what specialization they're running, and you're basically free to choose, kind of being a companion piece to this as a rambling talk. So yeah, as always, thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed this video, if you're willing to help out doing all of the algorithm things, always helps out quite a bit and is always appreciated. And if you enjoy my content, I'm also always streaming in the evenings on Twitch and YouTube. So if you're enjoying this, you can always pop in there. As for instance, as well, this entirety of this in-depth guide was recorded on a stream. So you can have a sneak peek up front. And lastly, the only thing left for me to say is thank you very much for joining me. And as always, have a good night.